Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I always thought I was doing something wrong with my money. For 2 years straight, I kept second-guessing every financial decision I'd ever made. Did I forget to pay something back in college? Did some random medical bill slip through the cracks? I couldn't figure out why my credit score looked like it belonged to someone who'd given up on life. Every time I checked it, my stomach would drop. The number just sat there, mocking me. I'd run through my entire financial history in my head, trying to find the mistake. Nothing made sense. I paid my bills on time. I didn't have any major debt. Yet somehow I was stuck in this hole. I finally decided to apply for a basic credit card last month. Nothing fancy. Just something to help rebuild whatever mess I'd apparently created. The bank guy was nice enough. He pulled up my file and started scrolling through my history with this casual expression on his face. Then he asked me to confirm something that made my blood run cold. He wanted to verify that I'd had these accounts since 2022. I felt like the floor disappeared underneath me. I told him I didn't know what accounts he was talking about. He looked confused and pointed to his screen. He explained that it showed I'd opened several credit cards in spring of 2022. I told him I hadn't opened anything that year. The color drained from his face. He turned the screen toward me, and there they were. 3 credit cards I'd never seen before, all in my name, all with missed payments scattered across the last 3 years like landmines. I left the bank in a daze. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock my car. Someone had stolen my identity. Someone had tanked my credit, and I'd been blaming myself this whole time. I drove home trying to figure out who could have done this. A data breach? Some scammer who got my information? I started mentally listing every sketchy website I'd ever used. When I got home, my mom was in the kitchen making coffee. I dropped my bag on the counter harder than I meant to. I told her we needed to talk. She looked up and asked what about. I said we needed to talk about the credit card someone had opened in my name 3 years ago. I watched her face carefully. I was looking for shock, concern, anger on my behalf. Instead, she just sighed and turned back to the coffee pot. She said that I'd found out about those cards. Her tone was so casual it made my skin crawl. I asked her what she meant and whether she'd known about this the whole time. She poured her coffee slowly, too slowly. Then she admitted she'd needed them. The room started spinning. I asked if she was telling me she'd opened credit cards in my name. She said I wasn't using my credit for anything anyway. She explained that she'd had some expenses come up and her credit was already maxed out. She actually said it made sense at the time. Made sense. Those were the words she used. I told her she'd destroyed my credit score. I asked if she understood what she'd done. I explained that I couldn't get approved for anything and that I'd been stressing about this for months, thinking I'd messed up somehow. She finally looked at me and said I didn't need good credit for anything anyway. My own mother, the person who was supposed to protect me, she'd stolen my identity and ruined my financial future like it was nothing. I asked her how much she owed. She said she didn't know. Maybe a few thousand. I repeated her words back to her in disbelief. A few thousand. Then I asked if she'd just decided my credit was free real estate. She told me not to be dramatic. She said I could rebuild it. I asked her if she knew how long that takes. I demanded to know if she had any idea what she'd done. She shrugged. She said it wasn't like I was buying a house anytime soon. I had to walk away before I said something I couldn't take back. I locked myself in my room and started researching. Identity theft by a family member. Fraud. How to dispute fraudulent accounts. The rabbit hole went deep and it was all terrible. I had 2 options. Report her to the police and press charges, or try to handle it privately and eat the debt myself. Either way, my credit was destroyed and I was the one who had to fix it. I spent the next week gathering documentation. Every account she'd opened, every missed payment, every maxed out balance. The total came to just under $8,000. $8,000 of debt I didn't create, attached to my name like a permanent stain. I filed police reports. I contacted the credit bureaus. I disputed every single fraudulent account. The process was exhausting. Every phone call required me to explain that my own mother had stolen my identity. The sympathy in people's voices made it worse somehow. My mom barely spoke to me during all of this. When she did, it was to accuse me of overreacting. She asked if I was really going to ruin our relationship over some credit cards. I told her she'd already ruined it when she committed fraud. The accounts eventually got closed. The debt got removed from my name, but my credit score? Still in the basement. Turns out even when you prove the accounts were fraudulent, the damage takes years to fully reverse. I started from scratch, got one of those secured cards that only lets you spend what's already in your account. The kind of thing designed for people rebuilding after bankruptcy. Every purchase feels like a small act of reclaiming my life. $20 for groceries, $10 for gas. Watching it auto-pay from my checking account. Nothing she can touch. Nothing anyone can touch. I'm 26 years old and I'm building credit. Like a teenager with their first part-time job. But at least it's mine. My mom still lives in the house. We don't talk much. She thinks I'm holding a grudge. I think she stole my identity and showed zero remorse. Every time I check my credit score now and see it inch up by a few points, I feel this weird mix of pride and rage. Pride that I'm fixing it. Rage that I had to fix it in the first place. She still hasn't apologized. I started playing pool when I was 14 years old at my uncle's bar. He taught me the basics, and over the years I got pretty good at it. Now I play at least 3 times a week against guys who take the game seriously. The 2 of my regular opponents compete at the national level, so I've learned to hold my own against tough competition. Last week I matched with this girl on a dating app. We chatted for a few days and she mentioned she liked playing pool. I told her I knew a good spot and we made plans for Saturday evening. I picked her up around 7 and we headed to this pool bar I've been going to for years. The place has good tables, decent drinks, and it's not too crowded on weekends. We ordered some beers and grabbed a table in the back. She seemed excited to play, so we racked up our first game. I could tell right away that she was a casual player. Nothing wrong with that. I took it easy, missing a few shots on purpose, keeping things relaxed. We were laughing and talking between shots, just having a good time. We played several more rounds like that. She won some, I won some. The conversation flowed naturally. We ordered wings and took a break to eat. While we were talking, I mentioned my 2 friends who compete at nationals. She seemed impressed and asked if that meant I was really good. I told her I played a lot. She said that for the next game she wanted me to stop going easy on her. I asked if she was sure. She insisted, saying she wanted to see what I could actually do. So I stepped it up a bit for the next few rounds. I wasn't crushing her or anything, just playing a little better, making her work for it. She seemed to enjoy the challenge. She was concentrating more, trying different angles, really getting into it. Around 10:30 we decided to play one last game before heading out. I broke and it was just one of those perfect breaks. 2 striped balls dropped, and when I looked at the table I had clear shots lined up for everything else. The positioning was perfect. She had told me not to go easy, so I figured why not just play it straight. I ran the table. Took me maybe 3 minutes total. When I potted the 8 ball I looked up expecting maybe a laugh or a comment, but her expression was strange. Kinda blank. She just nodded and put her cue back on the rack. I tried to play it off as a lucky break. She just agreed quietly. We finished our drinks and I paid the bill. The whole time she was on her phone, barely looking up. I figured maybe she was tired or got a text from someone. We walked to my car and the drive back to her place felt off. She stared out the window the entire time. I tried starting a conversation a few times but got one-word answers. I asked if she was okay. She said she was fine. I asked if she had fun tonight. She said sure. I pulled up outside her building and she unbuckled immediately. She thanked me for the night. I said we should do it again. She said maybe, and that she would text me. She got out and walked to her door without looking back. I sat there confused about what had just happened. The night had been going great up until that last game. I drove home replaying everything, trying to figure out what went wrong. When I got home, I checked my phone and saw a message from her that had come through about 10 minutes earlier. She said that she had asked me not to go easy on her, but she didn't mean turn it into a statement. She said it felt like an ego thing at the end, and it made her uncomfortable. I read it 3 times trying to understand. A statement? An ego thing? I sat on my couch staring at the message completely confused. She had told me not to hold back. I had a good break and played it out like I normally would. That's what she asked for. I typed out a response explaining that I wasn't trying to show off or prove anything. I told her she had asked me to play for real, and that's what I did. The break was lucky and the rest just fell into place. I wasn't trying to make her feel bad. I sent it and waited. An hour passed. Nothing. I went to bed and checked again in the morning. Still nothing. By Monday afternoon, I realized she had completely ghosted me. I tried one more message asking if we could talk about it, but never got a response. I told my friend about it at the pool hall on Tuesday, and he just shook his head. He asked me to confirm that she told me not to go easy. I didn't go easy, and now she was mad. I said that apparently it was an ego thing. He said it was insane. He asked what she expected me to do, throw the game after she said not to. I said I had no idea. The whole thing still doesn't make sense to me. If someone tells you to play for real, and you do exactly that, how is that showing off? I ran the table because I had a great break and clean shots, not because I was trying to prove something. If anything, holding back after she asked me not to would have been more disrespectful. But apparently playing pool the way I normally play makes me the bad guy. I deleted her number after a week of silence. The next Saturday I was back at the same pool hall with my friends. We were playing our usual games when I noticed someone familiar walk in. It was her with a different guy. They grabbed a table on the other side of the room. I didn't say anything to my friends, just kept playing. About 20 minutes later I heard her voice getting louder. She was telling him to come on, that he wasn't even trying. She said it was boring. I looked over and saw her standing with her arms crossed while the guy she was with lined up a shot. He missed an easy shot and she rolled her eyes. She said seriously, asking if he could at least make it interesting. The guy looked embarrassed and tried another shot. He made it this time, but she didn't seem impressed. She said finally. My friend noticed me watching and followed my eyes. He asked if that was the girl from last week. I said yeah. He said this was good. We kept playing, but I couldn't help overhearing her getting more frustrated. She complained that he said he was good at this. She kept saying it was so boring. The guy she was with looked like he wanted to disappear. After a few more minutes, he said something to her and she grabbed her purse. They left without finishing their game. My friend started laughing. He said she was impossible and that the poor guy didn't stand a chance. I agreed. He said I dodged the bullet. I told him I knew. The bartender came over to clear their table and shook his head. He told us she had been in there 3 times that month with different guys. He said it was the same thing every time and he said she complained no matter what they did. I asked if he was serious. He said that last week some guy let her win every game and she got mad about that too. He said she claimed he was being condescending. My friend nearly spit out his drink laughing. He asked if she got mad whether you went easy or didn't go easy. The bartender said pretty much. He said some people just liked being unhappy. I finished my beer and lined up my next shot. The whole situation suddenly seemed ridiculous. There was no winning with someone like that. No matter what you did, it would be wrong. I cleared the table on my next turn, and my friend handed me another beer. He said that at least I found out early. I agreed. He said to imagine dealing with that for months. I said no thanks. We played until midnight and I drove home feeling better about the whole thing. I've been driving for about 15 years now and I thought I'd seen everything on the road. Close calls, reckless drivers, people texting behind the wheel. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened last month on Burnwell Street. My job as a regional manager for a small logistics company means I spend a lot of time on the road visiting different warehouses and distribution centers. That day, I was heading back from a supplier meeting around 3 in the afternoon. The meeting had gone well, and I was looking forward to getting home at a reasonable hour for once. Burnwell Street is one of those residential roads with a speed limit of 25 miles per hour. Kids sometimes play in the yards, people walk their dogs, and there are always a few cars parked along the curb. I'm always careful there, keeping my eyes peeled for anything unexpected. I was going maybe 20 miles per hour, if that, just cruising along and enjoying the quiet neighborhood. The weather was nice that day, sunny and clear, perfect visibility, no distractions. Then I saw them on the sidewalk ahead, a man and a teenage boy, maybe 15 or 16 years old. The man had his hand on the boy's shoulder, and they seemed to be having some kind of intense conversation. The boy looked uncomfortable, his shoulders hunched. I didn't think much of it. Father and son having a talk, probably. I kept driving, maintaining my speed, staying in my lane. What happened next took maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like slow motion. The man suddenly grabbed his son by both shoulders and shoved him hard, right off the sidewalk and directly into the path of my car. I slammed on the brakes immediately, but there wasn't enough time. The distance was too short. The front of my car hit the boy, and he went down hard on the pavement. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might explode. I threw the car into park and jumped out, my hands shaking. The boy was on the ground, clutching his leg and wincing in pain. But what really struck me was the look on his face. He wasn't just in pain. He looked confused, betrayed even. He stared up at his father with this expression I'll never forget. The man, on the other hand, immediately started yelling. He screamed about how I'd hit his son and wasn't watching where I was going. He kept shouting about what I'd done to his boy. I was still in shock, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. I told him that he'd pushed his son. I said I saw him do it with my own eyes. He asked me what I was talking about and called me a liar. He accused me of speeding and said I'd hit his boy because I was reckless. The boy was still on the ground, not saying anything. He just kept looking between his father and me, his face pale. I told the man I was calling 911. He said I better call them. He started going on about how I was going to pay for everything. Medical bills, pain and suffering, all of it. He said I destroyed his son's life and would regret this. He even mentioned specific numbers, saying he'd sue me for at least $200,000. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and called for an ambulance and the police. The whole time this man kept shouting at me, getting more and more aggressive. He was listing off injuries his son might have, talking about lawyers and lawsuits, saying he knew people who could make sure I lost everything. A few neighbors started coming out of their houses to see what was happening. The man immediately turned to them, telling them how I'd hit his innocent son. He put on this whole performance, playing the distraught father. The boy finally spoke up, his voice quiet and strained. He told his dad to stop. The father snapped at him to stay quiet and not say anything. He said the driver was going to pay for what they did to him. When the ambulance arrived around 3:25, the paramedics immediately attended to the boy. He had a fractured leg and some bruising, but thankfully nothing life-threatening. They loaded him onto a stretcher. The father kept up his act the entire time, playing the concerned parent, telling the paramedics how I'd been speeding and came out of nowhere. He claimed I was going at least 45 miles per hour. The police arrived shortly after at 3:30. 2 officers started taking statements. The father went first, spinning this elaborate story about how I'd been driving recklessly, how I wasn't paying attention, how his poor son had just stepped off the curb to cross the street. He even claimed the boy was looking both ways and I came flying around the corner. None of that was true. One of the officers asked me for my version of events. I explained that the man had pushed his son on purpose, right in front of my car. I said, I saw the whole thing happen. I told them I was driving slowly, under the speed limit. The father exploded. He called me a liar and said I was trying to cover up my reckless driving. He yelled that his son was injured because of me and my carelessness. He started demanding I be arrested on the spot. The officers separated us and took more detailed statements. I explained everything I'd seen, every detail. The exact moment the father grabbed the boy, the shove, how I'd been going slowly. The father stuck to his story. He kept embellishing it too, adding details about how fast I was supposedly going. The boy, when they questioned him at the hospital later, barely said anything. He just stared at the ground and gave one-word answers. He didn't confirm his father's story, but he didn't contradict it either. I thought I was done for. It was my word against his, and his son wasn't talking. I could already imagine the lawsuit, the insurance nightmare, maybe even criminal charges. My hands were still shaking. Then one of the officers came back over to me around 4:15. He said I needed to stay there a bit longer because they were checking something. They'd noticed the security cameras mounted on several of the houses along the street. Within an hour, they had footage from two different angles. One camera belonged to the house right where it happened. The other was from across the street, and it showed everything. The father grabbing his son by the shoulders. The shove. The boy's shocked expression when he stumbled into the street. My car braking immediately. The skid marks on the pavement proved I tried to stop. The father's face went white when they told him what the cameras had captured. The officer told him that he was under arrest for child endangerment, insurance fraud, and filing a false police report. The man started begging them to wait. He said they didn't understand. He claimed he was just trying to secure their future. He actually asked if they knew how expensive college was and how he was supposed to pay for it. He said he had $23,000 in debt and no way to pay for his son's education. The more he talked, the worse it got for him. He actually admitted to the whole scheme right there on the street. He said he'd been planning it for weeks. He'd researched which streets had the most traffic. He'd been watching cars go by, waiting for the right moment. The officers looked horrified. One of them asked if the boy knew about the plan. The father said no, that he'd just told his son they were going for a walk. The boy had no idea what was about to happen. That made it even worse somehow. The father ended up going to prison. 18 months. My lawyer advised me to file a civil suit against him for the emotional distress and the damage to my car. The whole front bumper needed replacing, which cost $1,200. The alignment was thrown off too. That was another $350. Then there were the medical costs for the therapy I needed after. I had nightmares for weeks about hitting that boy. I kept seeing his face in my dreams. We won the case and were awarded $45,000 total, though I doubt I'll ever see much of the money. The man had nothing. His bank account had $800 in it when they checked. The boy recovered fully from his injuries. The fracture healed after about 8 weeks. I heard through the legal proceedings that he went to live with his mother in another state. She'd been out of the picture for about 4 years. She'd left because of the father's increasingly erratic behavior and controlling nature. Apparently, this wasn't the first time he'd done something dangerous. He'd previously tried to stage a slip and fall at a grocery store, but chickened out at the last second. The boy's mother filed for full custody and got it immediately given the circumstances. I still drive down Burnwell's Street sometimes. I always slow down even more now, going maybe 15 miles per hour. I can't help but look at the spot where it happened. There's a small crack in the pavement where the boy landed. I hope that kid is doing okay. He was just as much a victim in this as I was, maybe more so. His own father used him like a tool. What kind of father does that to his own child? I heard from my lawyer that the boy started seeing a therapist too. The whole experience really messed him up. He stopped talking to his father completely. Wouldn't even take his calls from prison. I've been in property management for about 5 years now, and most days are pretty straightforward. My job involves handling various administrative tasks, but one of the most critical parts is dealing with the New York City Department of Buildings portal. We have to complete these time-sensitive sign-offs for our properties, and missing even one can result in massive fines for the company. Usually it's not a big deal. You log into the portal, click a box or two, maybe fill out a quick form, and you're done. The city gives us reasonable deadlines, so when you stay on top of things, it's manageable. About a year ago, our company brought this guy out of retirement to handle compliance work. Let's call him Dan since he was older and supposedly had decades of experience in the industry. The owner thought his expertise would be valuable, especially for navigating all the regulatory requirements we deal with in the city. The problem was that Dan had clearly been out of the game for a while, and technology had moved on without him. Dan struggled with pretty much every digital system we used. Our project management software confused him. Email threads seemed to overwhelm him, and the Department of Buildings portal might have been written in ancient Greek for all the comfort he had with it. I tried to help him in the beginning. I showed him how to navigate the portal step by step. I even created a simple guide with screenshots that he could reference. But Dan waved me off every time and insisted he could handle it because that's what he was hired to do. Then came the day we all dreaded. Dan missed a sign-off deadline. Not by a little bit either. He completely forgot about it until the fine notice arrived at our office. The company got hit with a $10,000 penalty because one box didn't get checked in time. Our boss was furious, and honestly, so was everyone else. That kind of money doesn't just disappear. It affects bonuses, raises, and company morale. The fine had to be paid within 30 days or it would increase to $15,000. We had a meeting to discuss what went wrong and how to prevent it from happening again. Our boss, Dan, and I sat in the conference room going over options. I suggested creating one shared company login for the portal instead of everyone having individual accounts. That way, we could set up email alerts to go to our administrative assistant, who's incredibly organized and never misses anything. She could monitor incoming notifications and make sure whoever needed to handle a sign-off actually did it before the deadline. I explained that the administrative assistant already managed our shared calendar and deadlines for other projects, so this would fit right into her workflow. It seemed like a simple solution, but Dan shot it down immediately. He said absolutely not and claimed it would create liability issues. He went on about how anyone could make unauthorized sign-offs under a shared account. I pointed out that we were all professionals and already handling these sign-offs individually, so this would just add a safety net. I mentioned that other property management companies in the city used shared logins without any problems. Dan refused again and insisted the security risk was too high. He claimed we needed to maintain individual accountability. I could tell from the way he said it that security wasn't really his concern. The truth was that Dan had a habit of putting things off until the absolute last minute. His inbox was probably flooded with reminder emails that he ignored until deadline day, and he didn't want anyone else seeing evidence of his procrastination. Our boss decided to keep the system but gave Dan a stern warning. The next mistake would cost him his entire annual bonus. Based on what I knew about his salary, that bonus was probably around $25,000. Dan went pale when our boss said it. A few weeks after that meeting, something strange started happening. Different staff members began pulling me aside to tell me that Dan had been asking questions about me. Not work-related questions either. He wanted to know about my personal life, my work habits, whether I'd ever made mistakes on projects. Our administrative assistant told me Dan had asked her if I ever came in late or left early. One of the junior staff members said Dan asked if I had ever missed any deadlines. He was clearly trying to dig up dirt on me, probably to deflect attention from his own shortcomings or to discredit my suggestion from the meeting. I'm not the type to let something like that slide. I sent an email to the entire company staff explaining what Dan was doing and making it clear that I would no longer be helping him with any sign-offs or technical issues. If he wanted to protect his individual accountability so badly, he could handle everything himself. I copied our boss on the email. The office got pretty tense after that. Dan and I barely spoke. He stopped attending the weekly team meetings and started eating lunch alone at his desk, but months went by without incident, and I figured maybe he'd finally gotten the hang of the portal. Our administrative assistant told me she noticed Dan had started setting multiple phone alarms to remind himself about upcoming deadlines. Then Dan went on vacation. He took 2 weeks off to visit family across the country. Before he left, he told everyone he'd be completely unreachable because he was going to a remote cabin with no cell service. That should have been a red flag, but nobody thought much of it at the time. On the second week of his vacation, I got a call from an engineer we work with regularly. He asked if Dan was still with our company because he'd been trying to reach him for over 2 weeks. He explained that he'd sent about 15 emails and left several voicemails. There was a sign-off due the next day for the building on Amsterdam Avenue, and he needed confirmation that Dan was handling it. The engineer sounded frustrated and said the deadline was at 5 p.m. the following day. My heart sank a little. This was exactly the kind of situation my shared login idea would have prevented. But I remembered my email and my promise to stay out of Dan's responsibilities. I told the engineer that Dan was on vacation but said I would text him to let him know it was urgent. The engineer thanked me and said he hoped Dan could sort it out because another missed deadline would mean a $12,000 fine. I sent Dan a quick text explaining the situation. I didn't hear back from him that day. The next morning, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. It was Dan, and he sounded panicked. He asked if I had handled that sign-off yet. I told him no, I wasn't in the office that day. I reminded him that he had been concerned about security and unauthorized access, so it wouldn't be appropriate for me to log into his account. Dan protested that he couldn't get to the office because he was 6 hours away. He said he was in the middle of nowhere, and the nearest town was an hour away. I suggested he could do it from his phone since the portal works on mobile browsers. He said he didn't know how to do that and begged me to please just handle it this one time. He said he'd make it up to me and promised he wouldn't cause any more problems. I told him that he had made it clear he wanted individual accountability, so he would have to figure it out. I reminded him about the email I sent months ago and said I wasn't going to go back on my word. I hung up and went about my day. Later, I heard from our administrative assistant what happened next. Dan had called her in a panic around 8 in the morning. She told him the same thing I did, that she couldn't access his account. Dan couldn't figure out how to access the portal from his phone. He was too proud or too stubborn to ask anyone else for help. So instead, he got in his car and drove 6 hours back to the city. He arrived at the office around 2:30 in the afternoon, looking exhausted and angry. He went straight to his desk, logged into the portal, and clicked one box. The whole thing took him less than 2 minutes. Then he drove 6 hours back to continue his vacation. 12 hours of driving, hundreds of dollars in gas, an entire day of his vacation wasted. Our administrative assistant said she watched him the whole time he was in the office, and he didn't say a word to anyone, all because he refused to implement a simple system that would have prevented the whole mess. When he got back to the office after his vacation ended, he looked exhausted. He had dark circles under his eyes and seemed defeated. Our boss called him into a private meeting that lasted about an hour. Nobody knows exactly what was said, but afterward Dan seemed much quieter. He never asked me for help again, and he never tried digging up dirt on anyone else either. A few weeks later, our boss announced that we'd be implementing the shared login system I had suggested. Dan didn't object this time. I've spent years handling inheritance disputes, so complicated family cases don't usually surprise me. But yesterday's phone call was different. A woman I'd never spoken to before introduced herself as my grandfather's second wife. Then she asked if she could pay 250,000 euros instead of 320,000. Like she was negotiating a grocery bill. To understand why this felt so insulting, you need to know about the house. The property wasn't my grandfather's. It never belonged to him. My great-grandparents on my grandmother's side built it themselves. Every brick, every window, every door was paid for with their own money. It was a multi-family building with 3 apartments. They created it through decades of hard work. Before they died, they made one thing clear. The house had to stay in the family. My great-grandmother lived in one of the apartments. My grandparents lived directly above her. The closeness wasn't just about distance. They saw each other every day. Shared meals, shared lives. My parents divorced when I was 1 year old, but my sister and I still spent a lot of time at that house. My great-grandmother was the kindest person I've ever known. When she passed away, I was 8 and my sister was 15. We were old enough to have real memories of her, real relationships. When my great-grandmother needed rest, we were sent upstairs to my grandparents. But that arrangement only worked on paper. About 85% of the time, I was sent back downstairs almost immediately. My sister got put in front of the television. We weren't welcomed. We were just shuffled around. The moment my great-grandmother died, my grandparents cut us off completely. No phone calls, no visits, no explanations, just silence. My grandfather had lived rent-free his entire adult life in that house. He never built it. He never paid for it. He never contributed anything meaningful to it. He worked driving a taxi, cheated on my grandmother constantly, and spent most of his free time in a little garden plot outside the city. His own family was just an inconvenience to him. He hated my father, openly, consistently. A few years before he died, after my grandmother had already passed away, my grandfather married a Ukrainian refugee who was 40 years younger than him. She had 4 children from previous relationships. Then he started making moves. He officially restructured the house. What used to be 3 apartments became 2 on paper. He gifted one portion to his new wife. He sold the other portion to her for a suspiciously low amount. The goal was obvious: transfer the entire property to her, make sure his own son got nothing. He even reached out to my father after years of silence, but it wasn't reconciliation. It was manipulation. He wanted my father to sign away his remaining 6% share of the house. Once my father did that, my grandfather disappeared again. No relationship, no warmth, nothing. When my grandfather was dying, a notary was brought to his hospital bed so he could finalize everything. Even then, he refused to make peace with his only son. He died 3 years ago. My father sued his stepmother shortly after. Thankfully, he had taken out legal insurance years earlier, so the financial burden wasn't crushing. The case dragged on, but my father believed he was doing the right thing, protecting what should have stayed in our family. My father died 1 year ago. What my grandfather didn't account for were his own legal mistakes. The way he structured the property transfers, the timing, the documentation. It wasn't airtight. Because of those errors, his wife cannot simply keep the house. The court ruled that she has to pay out roughly half the property's value to us. That amount is 320,000 euros, which brings me back to yesterday. She called me directly. It was our first real conversation. She told me she had been thinking about the settlement. She knew the amount that was decided, but she wanted to ask if I would consider accepting 250,000 instead. I didn't respond immediately. She went on to explain that the legal fees had been overwhelming. She said the lawyers were taking everything she had and that she didn't know how she was supposed to come up with that much money. I reminded her that the amount was determined by the court. She acknowledged that, but said she also had to think about her children and their future. She described how difficult this situation was for all of them. I stayed quiet for a moment. She insisted she wasn't trying to be unreasonable and that she just needed some flexibility. I told her that her late husband had lived rent-free his entire adult life in a house he didn't build. I pointed out that he cut off contact with his only grandchildren the moment his mother-in-law died. I explained that he deliberately tried to rewrite the inheritance to benefit her and her children while cutting out his own son. Then I said that now she was asking us to absorb the financial results of his choices because it had become inconvenient. She protested that she didn't create this situation. I told her that neither did we. She said she was the one dealing with it now. I told her that so were we. She went quiet. I made it clear that the settlement stands at 320,000 euros. She said she didn't know if she could manage that. I told her she would need to speak with her lawyer about her options. She tried one more time to explain her position, but I cut her off and told her the conversation was over. I hung up. What she doesn't know, what I didn't tell her, is exactly why my grandfather was the kind of man who could do all of this without a second thought. He touched my sister inappropriately when we were children. He made multiple attempts to pursue my mother, tried to get close to her against her will, even tried to get into the bathroom while she was showering. When my father was a child, my grandfather almost touched him inappropriately. My grandmother came home just in time. The only time my grandfather ever reached out to me directly was when he wanted something. He called because he wanted my mother to move into his house and take care of his first wife, the same woman who had always hated my mother. He framed it as a favor and suggested that afterward they could sit on the terrace together and drink wine. Even his own sister and mother eventually cut him out of their lives. That entitlement didn't die with him, it just transferred. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.